Folks, buckle up, because today, we're diving headfirst into the dumpster fire of economic mismanagement that is the US economy in 2025. You know the drill, the government screws up, the Fed prints money like it's monopoly cash, and you, the hard-working taxpayer, get stuck with the bill. But hey, at least the politicians get to pat themselves on the back for saving the economy, right? Wrong. Let's tear apart the latest economic data and expose the clown show for what it is. This is Boss Economics World, and I'm your no-nonsense guide to the economic apocalypse. Oh, look, folks, the economic geniuses in Washington have done it again. According to the latest Federal Reserve data, U.S. factory production dropped by 0.4% in April 2025, marking the first decline in 6 months. That's right, after a brief sugar high in Q1, manufacturers are now choking on the bitter pill of higher import duties, trade policy chaos, and government-induced uncertainty. And if you think this is just a blip, think again. This is a flashing red warning sign of a deeper, systemic economic mess, all courtesy of your friendly neighborhood policymakers. Now, before we dive into the juicy details, let's set the stage. Manufacturing accounts for a whopping 3/4 of total industrial production in the U.S. So, when factories start coughing up smoke, it's not just a problem for blue-collar workers in Ohio, it's a problem for the entire economy. And guess what? The government's fingerprints are all over this disaster. From Trump's tariff tantrums to the Fed's obsession with papering over cracks, this is a masterclass in how to tank an economy and blame everyone but yourself. Let's start with the elephant in the room, tariffs. Remember when President Trump promised that his trade wars would bring back jobs and make America great again? Well, fast forward to 2025, and what do we have? A 0.4% drop in factory production, with declines in motor vehicles, computers, and apparel leading the charge. Coincidence? I think not. Here's the deal, folks, tariffs are nothing more than a tax on American businesses and consumers. When you slap higher duties on imported goods, like the steel and aluminum tariffs Trump doubled down on in 2024, you don't just hurt foreign exporters. You hurt American manufacturers who rely on those imports to make their products. According to a 2024 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBR, Trump's tariffs cost U.S. businesses an extra $40 billion annually in higher input costs. And guess who pays for that? You do, through higher prices at the store. But wait, there's more. The Fed's data shows that the decline in factory output was especially sharp in consumer goods, cars, appliances, electronics, you name it. Why? Because consumers are pulling back spending, as evidenced by a separate report showing retail sales growth slowing to a crawl in April 2025. And why are consumers tightening their belts? Because imported goods, like the Chinese-made sporting goods and car parts, are now more expensive, thanks to tariffs. It's a vicious cycle, folks. Tariffs jack up costs, manufacturers cut production, workers lose jobs, and consumers stop spending. Bravo, Washington. And don't even get me started on the uncertainty factor. Businesses hate uncertainty, and Trump's trade policy has been a roller coaster of broken promises and half-baked deals. Just look at the numbers. A 2025 survey by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce found that 68% of American manufacturers have paused investment plans due to trade policy confusion. They're not building new factories or hiring workers, they're sitting on their cash, waiting for the government to stop playing economic roulette. And who can blame them? Now, let's zoom out from the tariff train wreck and look at the bigger picture, capacity utilization. This is a fancy term that measures how much of our factory's potential output is actually being used. In April 2025, the Fed reported that factory capacity utilization fell to 76.8%. To put that in perspective, a healthy economy typically runs at around 80% capacity utilization, anything below that signals weakness, and anything below 75% is a screaming alarm bell for recession. So, what does 76.8% tell us? It tells us that factories are sitting idle, machines are gathering dust, and workers are being sent home early, if they're not laid off already. And why is this happening? Because demand is tanking, thanks to, you guessed it, government policies. Higher tariffs are killing export markets, consumer spending is drying up, and businesses are too scared to invest. The Fed can print all the money it wants, but it can't print demand, folks. Oh, and speaking of the Fed, let's not forget their role in this mess. For years, they've kept interest rates artificially low, flooding the economy with cheap money in a desperate attempt to prop up growth. But here's the problem, cheap money doesn't fix structural problems. It just inflates asset bubbles, like the stock market, which hit an all-time high in March 2025, even as factory production started to crater. According to a 2025 report by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the U.S. economy is now more leveraged than ever, with corporate debt hitting a record $10.5 trillion. So, while Wall Street parties, Main Street is left holding the bag. If you still think this is just a temporary setback, let me hit you with another data bomb. the Institute for Supply Management, ISM, gauge of factory activity. This is one of the most reliable indicators of manufacturing health, and guess what? It's been stuck in contraction territory for months, with orders shrinking and prices accelerating. Why? Because tariffs are driving up input costs, and foreign buyers are ditching American goods in favor of cheaper alternatives. Let's break this down. The ISM's Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, fell to 48.3 in April 2025, anything below 50 signals contraction. Compare that to pre-tariff levels in 2017, when the PMI regularly topped 55, and you'll see just how far we've fallen. And here's the kicker, the ISM's New Orders Sub-Index, which measures future demand, dropped to 46.9, the lowest level since the COVID-19 pandemic. Translation: manufacturers aren't just struggling today, they're bracing for an even worse tomorrow. But hey, at least the government has a plan, right? Wrong. Instead of rolling back tariffs or passing pro-growth tax reforms, Washington is too busy playing political ping-pong. Just look at the latest headlines. As of May 2025, Congress still hasn't passed a budget, and the debt ceiling debate is looming like a dark cloud. Meanwhile, the White House is floating the idea of more tariffs, this time on European automakers. Because apparently, killing one industry wasn't enough. Now, let's talk about the real victims here, you, the American consumer. Remember that retail sales report I mentioned earlier? Growth decelerated, notably, in April 2025, with spending on cars, sporting goods, and other imported goods taking a nosedive. Why? Because tariffs have made these goods more expensive, and inflation is eating away at your purchasing power. Here's a fun fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, rose by 3.7% year-over-year in April 2025, the highest level since 2022. And that's the official number, folks. If you factor in the real-world costs of housing, healthcare, and education, the true inflation rate is likely closer to 6%, according to a 2025 analysis by Shadowstats. So, while the government tells you everything's fine, your wallet is screaming, help. And it's not just consumers who are feeling the pinch. Producers are getting hammered, too. A separate report showed an unexpected decline in producer prices in April 2025, reflecting a slump in margins. Why? Because manufacturers are caught in a vice, tariffs are driving up their costs, but weak demand means they can't pass those costs on to consumers. The result? Layoffs, factory closures, and a whole lot of pain. So, let's connect the dots, folks. Factory production is tanking, capacity utilization is slipping, consumer spending is stalling, and manufacturers are bracing for the worst. And who's to blame? The government, that's who. From tariffs to trade policy chaos to fiscal gridlock, Washington has created the perfect storm for an economic recession. And mark my words, if these trends continue, we could be looking at a full-blown downturn by the end of 2025. But hey, don't take my word for it, just look at the data. The Conference Board's leading economic index, LEI, a key predictor of recessions, has been flatlining for months, with a 0.1% decline in April 2025. Meanwhile, the yield curve, a classic recession indicator, briefly inverted in March 2025, signaling trouble ahead. And if history is any guide, an inverted yield curve has predicted every U.S. recession since World War II, according to a 2024 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Folks, the evidence is clear, the U.S. economy is on life support, and the government is the one pulling the plug. Tariffs are killing jobs, uncertainty is freezing investment, and consumers are running out of steam. And what's Washington doing about it? Nothing. They're too busy arguing over who gets credit for the next bailout or who gets blamed for the next shutdown. Here's my advice, fire the clowns in Washington and replace them with leaders who understand basic economics. Roll back the tariffs, pass pro-growth tax reforms, and stop treating the economy like a political football. Until then, buckle up, folks, because this ride is about to get a whole lot bumpier. This has been Boss Economics World, where we call out the economic nonsense so you don't have to. Smash that like button, subscribe for more truth bombs, and remember, in a world of economic lies, we're your beacon of brutal honesty. See you next time.